Welcome to this 10-part series about the Danish author Martinus, hosted by me, Lauge Schøler, and my co-host Karsten Jensen. The aim of this series is to provide an in-depth overview of Martinus and his work, the Third Testament. Martinus is mostly known in Scandinavia. However, there is a growing interest around the world in non-dogmatic approaches to spirituality, and as such, many non-Scandinavian speakers whom we assume will find his teachings interesting. But since most material about Martinus is in Danish, it can be a challenge for people outside of Scandinavia to know where to start or get a proper overview of the material. Over these 10 episodes, we dive into some technical detail as we try to convey some of Martinus' ideas. Martinus' work is vast and complex and takes up over 10,000 written pages, but we have picked 10 of the most central ideas to explore. We strive to make it as accessible as possible, and we hope it can provide the initial understanding of the most basic concepts that will make further study of his text more digestible. If you're interested in Martinus and his cosmology, you're welcome to visit martinus.dk for more information. In Denmark, there's an institute in Copenhagen which maintains the day-to-day administration, and there is a summer holiday center in Klint in northern Sjælland, where people interested in Martinus meet and study his works. Please enjoy. Right, welcome back. This is episode number 9, God and Prayer. And for a visual aid, you might want to, on the website, look up symbol number 21, which illustrates some of the mechanisms behind prayer and so on. But first on the concept of God.
Yeah, so I think one thing we could start with is that one thing that Martinus would say on several occasions was that in the future, God will become immensely popular.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, he's speaking into a background here where God, and this is happening all over the world, kind of has lost in popularity, both as a being and as a concept. And people see God as it's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a child, I asked my mother if she believed in God, and she said no, that was a hypothesis that she didn't need.
Yeah.
And I think many people in the modern world think like that we don't need God or this concept of God. And I think this is at the very core of Martinus' mission, that he wanted to convince us that we, first of all, that God is real.
Yeah.
There is there is a divinity, and we all each take part in it through our own being.
Yeah.
And also that there's a magic to the concept of God. So he would say in one place that even saying the name of God, or more correctly, putting your mind to the idea of God, simply concentrating on the concept of God, is something magical, and it's a prayer in its own right, just to think God.
Yeah.
And of course, it also ties into, so we described earlier this the structure of the living being, where we have our manifestations and we have our capacity for manifesting, but also experiencing our manifestations, the faculty of creation and experience. And then there is this inner core in our being that you could use this ancient term, the holiest of the holy.
Yeah.
Because it's nameless, it's in a sense it's unfathomable. Yeah. We cannot understand it, but at the same time we are it. Yeah. It's what we are when we come to kind of the bottom of our own identity. Yeah. And it is through being this nameless, holy something that is that we actually, whether we know it or not, whether we want it or not, have this connection with the divine. Yeah. And so, of course, we've lost sense of that, and we have a knowledge system, you could say, where that's not kind of factored into how we see the world. Yeah. And so this is what Martinus wanted to help us change in our mentality, and he wanted to logically and scientifically and intellectually reconnect us with the divine, both in our own nature, but also in the nature around us and in other beings and in the cosmos as a whole.
Yeah. Yes, true. And as we touched on last time, then like the different phases that people's spiritual experience go through, from nature mysticism to monasticism and so on, then most people nowadays, at least in Scandinavia, you consider themselves atheists, because like, why would you believe in this? And they see most of the church is like very old-fashioned and petrified, and like it doesn't really make any sense, and it's not very logical either. That's the thing, because people are so intelligent nowadays, thanks to so many incarnations of schooling, and they need logical explanations and not just some parable or metaphor, because it seems rather childish.
Yeah, and also if they're not atheists, then at least they're agnostics.
Yeah,
I mean, so I think one thing that has changed in recent years is that there was some years, at least in Scandinavia, where there's kind of a taboo around talking about religion or spirituality or the divine, and I think that has changed. Yeah. So there's an acceptance now about people having all sorts of beliefs, but also in that there's a relativism. So you can have your God and I can have mine if we're to talk about God. Yeah. And this is also a place where Martinus wants to bring us beyond this relativism and experience the divine as a fact, as an absolute fact.
Yeah, exactly. And he was not a relativist. I mean, he had a very clear idea about what God and the Godhead looks like.
It's the core of his whole cosmology.
Yeah, exactly. And I try to describe it. I mean, it's a big concept, but it's just like God is everything. Is everything, like, this is the most simple definition. God is everything.
Yeah.
It's all the material, all the spiritual, and it stretches endlessly in all directions, inside and out, up and down.
Yeah, and we might mention here that there's nothing outside God, which means there's no opposition to God. Yeah. So it's not like this dualistic picture that you have in traditional religions, where you have the divine, but then you also have the devil, the demonic, and so on, as a kind of opposition. Yeah. And Martinus would rather talk, just like he says that, say, for example, all things are well, even if it's painful. So he will talk about the good things that are unpleasant and the good things that are pleasant. And it's the same with the divine, that it has this kind of bright radiation, but it also has dark radiation. Exactly. So he wants to take us into a view of the world where everything exists within the Godhead. Yeah,
exactly. And it's an all-encompassing view of God, because like some of the old traditions, they have this. Some of them have this idea that you have God and then God's creation as a separate entity from God. But in Martinus' conception, it's like God is everything. There's no dividing line.
There's not a dividing line, but still there are some finer distinctions. Yeah. So I think we touched upon it before, that, for example, he would differentiate between the Father and the Son. Yeah. So we have God, you could say, as the universe, in a sense, the ultimate macrocosmic being. Yeah. But then you also have the sons of God, which are all the individual beings. Yeah. And there's a relationship here, and what the argument he wants to make is that the Godhead, seen as God the Father, is actually dependent on the sons of God, the individual living beings,
for stuff to happen, because otherwise it would just be there's the expression, just be a whiteout. instead of a blackout, it'd be a white, just pure whiteness, and nothing would happen.
Right? So although we might say that God is everything, within this everything, there's a structure.
Yeah.
There's some differentiation between the Father and the sons of God. Yeah. And then, of course, you have this concept of the Holy Ghost as that which is happening, you could say, in the interaction between the Godhead seen as God the Father and the sons of God. And maybe you should mention that Martinus used these traditional terms from Christianity, the Christianity that he was brought up in, studying the Bible in ordinary school or reading Bible stories. But when he talks about sons, he's talking about sons and daughters. I mean, there's no sex involved here. It's just a symbol or metaphor. Yeah. And it's the same when you talk about God the Father. God is not a male. It's both masculine and feminine, just like all the living beings, the individual beings are both masculine and feminine.
Exactly. And it can be a bit of a tough nut to crack, a difficult concept to grasp, but he uses this one metaphor if you wanted to understand God's consciousness and individual God's son's consciousness. I mean, the individual living being's consciousness. Because it's like, is it the same thing? Is it different things? But it's just like, you could imagine like a lampshade with a source of light in the middle, and then you have a billion little holes in that sphere that the light radiates out from and out. So you have all these little rays coming out. And to say like, you and me, we are both God, but we are tiny little fractions of God. And this divine light shining within us is the same light that shines through everybody else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And also, I mean, this is a symbol of the faculty of creation and experience and the principle of perspective. Yeah. The fact that there is this wholeness, but the experience of this wholeness is happening through a multitude of different perspectives. Yeah. And you could say God is, as the Father, is then the place where all these different perspectives are kind of unified into a whole, but also also one thing that's very important here is that because of this interaction between all the particular perspectives that the individual living beings have and the kind of overall perspective, because of this interaction, this is not something. I mean, this is why we have this spiral cycle. Yeah. This interaction, it has to be renewed all the time. This is what I wanted to say. Yeah. It's not something that is just there. Yeah. But it has to be renewed and refreshed all the time. And this is why we have this rhythm in the spiral cycle between the brighter spheres and the darker spheres. Yeah, that's what we talked about in a previous episode about God's primary consciousness, where you are in touch with the light and in touch with God and have cosmic consciousness, and then the secondary consciousness, where you recede and go through the process of involution into the darkness. Yeah, and this is where in classical, at least in Christianity, you have this. Also in Islam, of course, you have this. You have this image of the devil tempting us into darkness. Yeah. But the temptation is coming from within, and it's there because of a need. Yeah. And so we need to make this journey into darkness. But the Godhead, understood as God the Father, actually needs this as well, because the Godhead itself can only have its experience of life renewed through our, say, contribution. Exactly. It can only experience itself through us. Yes. Yeah. Because if it was only itself, nothing would happen, and it would be too boring. Yes, and then it goes the other way around as well, that ultimately we can only experience who we truly are through the Godhead, through our understanding of our identity with God. Yeah. Yeah. So it's also you could say it's a love affair. Yeah. that all of life is this. Although it might not always look like that, it's this kind of eternal love affair between the sons of God, the individual living beings, and the wholeness.
Yeah, it's a constant correspondence between those, and that's we mentioned about in the episode about the structure of the living being. It's a constant about like rubbing up of the timely against the eternal, and that kind of constantly rubbing up is like where the experience of life happens.
Yes, and it's, as you say, it's a communication, but also it's affective.
Yeah.
So there are emotions involved in it, and it's not always a happy relationship. This is what we're talking about here. That even though it's a love affair, it's not always a happy relationship. Yeah. Like most relationships that we have in our everyday life. Exactly. That there are these rhythms and interchanges between the good times, the fat years, and the meager years.
Yeah, that's true. And also one more point about how to perceive God, that that you and I, not having cosmic consciousness, we don't perceive God directly, so to speak. We have like physical eyes and senses and so on, and we can meet and interact with other sons of God, other human beings and other animals and beings and so on. But we don't see God directly. For that you need intuition.
Yes, so the limitation that we have, and maybe you should say about cosmic consciousness, it's not something that happens instantly. Yeah. It's a process. Mm-hmm. So it's a process where you might have these glimpses about which Martinus would say that it's an experience of some cosmic fact. Yeah. So it could be, for example, your own immortality. Yeah. And so there might be people also listening who actually have experienced it. Martinus thought there weren't many at this time in history, but in the world there will be a few who's experienced these cosmic glimpses where they've come into contact with cosmic facts and they just have realized the facticity of it. For example, our own immortality, which is the example he very often uses. Yeah. It might also be the experience that all is well, that there's nothing to be feared in this world. Yeah. And
people having a near-death experience or something.
Yeah, near-death experiences are also examples here. And so the process where we acquire cosmic consciousness, like any kind of birth, is a process that starts with these glimpses. Yeah. And so we become more and more cosmically conscious. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the actual birth, you could say. Yeah. So it's like there are some precursors. You could also say it like that. It's a bit like being in the womb before you're born. Yeah, and you have
birth pangs. Yeah,
you have birth pangs, and gradually, as Martinus described it, we evolve into this state where, when the time is ripe, we will experience this great birth that he's talking about. But what I wanted to touch upon here is that what we gradually become aware of in this process is eternity and eternal facts, and also our own identity with eternity. And for that we need intuition. So intuition is kind of that faculty which allows us to move beyond, you could say, the structures of time and space.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're no longer lost in the phenomena of everyday life. You see that people who are very atheistic, they're lost in like, I need to get the next thing, right? I need to get the next shiny object. I'm lost in money and power and so on.
Yeah, and also you could bring this thing about intuition a little down to earth by. So, for example, you mentioned in an earlier episode this fact about a pea that you can divide, and then the halves you can divide again, and you have. So even there, at some point, when you realize this can go on forever, that's in a sense an experience of eternity.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you have something like infinitesimal calculus that a lot of people learn in schools, where you also apply this this procedure of seeing something changing in a certain way towards infinity.
Yeah, Exactly, and also we can touch back to for episode 1. We talked about Martinus's cosmic initiation when he was 30 years old. That this experience of God, you need the faculty of intuition to understand it. But you see, like from the physical matter and all the manifest, then it stretches into X1, right? And then Martinus describes these golden threads, right? These manifesting golden threads. And if you look into X1, the source, the originator, then these golden threads, they vibrate and they disappear, they fade over the sensory horizon into nothingness.
Yeah, so when he described this great birth, and particularly what he called, so there were two, it happened over 2 days. And the first day he experienced what he called the white baptism of fire. And then there was this golden baptism of fire, which is what you're talking about now. And in Livesbog 6, he goes into some details about this experience. And what he describes when he describes this golden baptism of fire is kind of all these limitations we have when we experience in the physical domain gradually being taken away and then ending up in this state where there was only this golden light, and where he was one with the golden light. There was no experience of any organism and anything. And then the experience of this golden light kind of fading into nothingness, you could say, from a sensory or conceptual perspective, because it's not nothing. It's a nameless something that is, as he called it, but it's not something that we can perceive through our senses or conceive of. So even it cannot have a name, which is why it's nameless. And this is, of course, it's a bit hard to grasp how movement kind of fades into silence. But I think, so also he would use the term in Livesbog 1 that it artistically fades into silence and nothingness.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you mentioned in the previous episodes also, this design has always been there, and it's the best possible design for a continuous renewal experience. Because if it was only light, it would get too boring. If it was only dark, it would get too heavy. So you need this constant renewal, cyclical design for it to be interesting for all eternity.
And Martinus was once asked, "What's the meaning of life?" And one answer he gave was something like, well, in a sense, you could say there's no meaning to life because it just is. It is what it is. But in another way, you could see it as the meaning of life is the renewal of experience. Simply.
Or just experience.
Experience,
And then when you reach cosmic consciousness, it's a completely different experience from what we have right now, because when you reach cosmic consciousness, you can you're kind of melting together with God's consciousness, so to speak, and then you can travel through time and space and have a complete overview of everything. And that's the bulk of all beings in the universe. They have cosmic consciousness.
It's the exception that we don't have it, as Martinus described it. Also, you could say here that when we talk about experience being the meaning of life, that you could ask the question, what is the preconditions for experience to happen? And this is, in a sense, what Martinus is trying to describe. What do we need for experience to be placed? And I mean, we have experience. That's the starting point. So nobody could listen to this without having an experience. So, but what are the preconditions? And there he sees this concept of, not only the concept, but the being of God is a part of the precondition. Without God, there wouldn't be any experience, just like without the sons of God and the interaction happening between the sons of God and the Godhead, there wouldn't be any experience. So the experience is the interaction. So we need God just like God needs us.
Exactly. And it's been going on forever. That's the trippy part.
Well, I think if you look back, I mean, it's only with Christianity that people actually started thinking that the universe started at a certain point in time. Yeah. So it's if you look at the history of mankind on a grand scale, the normal perception of the universe has been that it's been there forever. Yeah. But then you have Christianity with its idea of God creating the universe out of nothing. Yeah. And that kind of so maybe could also touch upon. I think we'll wait with that to next time. But we just briefly we could touch upon the fact that Christianity having this idea of time as if it has an absolute beginning is actually what laid the foundation for materialism. Yeah. And if you look at the standard model of modern physics, where you have this idea of the Big Bang, it's just like the story of creation in the Bible. Of course, the numbers are different. So it didn't happen 6,000 years ago, but the structure of the thinking is identical. Yeah. And here you could say that Martinus is kind of reconnecting us to this on an intellectual basis. He's trying to reconnect us with this ancient tradition for conceiving of the universe as something that was always there. Yeah, and like many other, as you mentioned, spiritual traditions and religious traditions before Christianity and so on had this eternal world picture. And philosophers, I mean, people like Aristotle couldn't fathom the idea that the universe should be created at a particular time. Time and space, no. Yeah. And also, I think a lot of children, I mean, I remember when I was in school and one of my comrades in class said, the universe is infinite. And I said, how do you know that? And he jokingly said, oh, I see. So you think there's a wall and then what's behind the wall? And so, of course, it's actually possible. And also in modern physics, it's actually very common that when people have afterthoughts about this model, what they're told is that they'll get used to it. They'll get used to thinking like, for example, there was this Big Bang, or you have something like quantum leaps that also happen in a sense out of nothing. Yeah. And so if you start inquiring, but why does it happen? What's behind it? It's very common to hear that you'll get used to it. I actually once had a university professor tell me that when we discussed these things. He just told me that I would get used to it. You'll get used to it, yeah. Don't ask too many questions. But I didn't. Yeah. All right, there's a brief overview of the concept of God. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, we have the relationship to God. Yeah, which is the second part of this episode about prayer. Yeah. Yeah. Which is an interesting thing because Martinus, he writes about prayer and as a spiritual science, pretty much. And it's interesting because he describes the mechanics of how it works. Because as mentioned, like many people nowadays, at least in Scandinavia and so on, they consider religion, spirituality a bit silly. And the same thing with prayer. Like, why would you just like speak into the empty air and experience and expect some intervention to come back to you in your favor? That sounds a little bit superstitious, right? Yeah. And maybe we should just mention briefly here that Martinus has written 2 books about prayer. One is called The Mystery of Prayer. Yeah. There's another book called Meditation, where it's 3 articles, but one of these articles is called Meditation as well, and there he goes into to prayer as well, and they are both translated into English, and they can be read on the website. Exactly. If you want to know more details about the mechanics about prayer, then we can come into here in our time span. Yeah, exactly. And he says that prayer, he's mentioned also that he's been praying every day of his life as long as he can remember. He cannot remember a day where he didn't pray, Even before he got cosmic consciousness. He was very childhood on, He was a very devout Christian in some sense. And maybe we should we talked about that in the first episode, that even from childhood, Martinus felt this connection with the divine, at least in the sense that he was praying very often. But also he in school, and he only went to school for 7 years and only a few months every year. Yeah. But what they mainly read in school was stories from the Bible. Yeah. So he knew his Bible very well. Yeah. And he was very, very taken by the figure of the Christ. Yeah. And very often would think, what would the Christ have done if he were in my shoes or in my situation? Yeah. And so he had this very strong religiosity, but he was not a dogmatic Christian.
No, and he didn't believe in hell and so on.
No, exactly, and all the judgmental stuff you could say he didn't believe in. He believed in a very loving God, and felt comfort in having that relationship, and I mean. A lot of people came to Martinus for advice of different kinds. And very often when somebody asked him, they had some difficulties in life, he would ask them, do you pray? And if they didn't pray, he would strongly advise them to do so. Yeah. And he would say that it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, it still works.
it has an effect. Yeah. But he also goes into what the effect is, that it's not like, so he's saying in this book called The Mystery of Prayer, that prayer is not like an Aladdin's lamp. Yeah. It's not a method to magically change your destiny. Yeah. Because we need our destiny. Yeah. So it would be unhelpful if we could change our destiny. Yeah. And even if you have pain, it doesn't necessarily remove the pain. Yeah. But what it provides you is that it kind of reconnects you with your own inner divine source. Yeah. And makes you bold and strong, and can help you in kind of keeping up a good spirit in spite of the circumstances, all the difficulties that you encounter. Of course, magic might happen sometimes. Yeah. I know about people who's experienced that prayer also somehow magically has changed things, and you have stories of healing and so on. But it's not the rule; it's more like the exception. If there is kind of magical change, it's because the time is ripe. Yeah. It's because this person has kind of learned the lesson from all the difficulties.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's more about like it changes you, right? It changes you and your approach. It's just like it like he mentioned also that if you meditate on the fact and you pray about the fact that you're responsible for everything in your life, karmically speaking as well. Immediately, if you have that mindset, like a source of energy will like come through your system.
Right? Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and you will feel a bit more enlivened and a bit more bold to take on life's challenges and so on.
Yeah, so one way to look at the effect of prayer is also that it helps you to take responsibility for whatever situation that you're in, and you can gain help. Yeah, and what I mean, I don't think we have time, and I can't remember all the details, and you probably can't, but. One of the things that he advocates both in this small book called Meditation and The Mystery of Prayer is using the prayer Our Father from the Bible. Yeah, and he goes into a kind of detailed explanation of the different lines, what's the kind of magic that is inherent in this prayer.
That's the Lord's Prayer, right?
The Lord's Prayer, that's what it's called, yeah. Our Father.
Yeah, well,
it starts, but it's called the Lord's Prayer. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think we have time to go into every line of that.
No.
But it's like the same thing about you. Like the gist of it, I guess, is like you take responsibility for your life and you connect with God.
Yeah. So in our Lord's Prayer, what we first do is that we connect with God and the name of God, which is holy in the sense that God is everything. Yeah. This is one of the things, and all is well. Yeah. So these are some of the things that he will mention about. Yeah. This hallowed be thy name. Yeah. But then, of course, you pray that you kind of draw of the resources that we have in the heavens, meaning the spiritual realm, and have help from the spiritual realm to face your difficulties in the physical world. Yeah. And also he would talk about if you have problems, if you have your daily struggle of life, you can ask for help about that. And I mean, to have a job, to find a job, to make money,
to find a partner,
whatever your basic needs are. And one of the things that, so he would say that the prayer is most effective if it's unselfish, but it's also effective if it's selfish. So it can both be white magic and black magic, you could say. But praying for something unselfish is what he advises. But he would say praying for the basic needs to be fulfilled is not selfish.
Exactly. And I also, like, we talked about the phrase about seek the kingdom of God and all else will be added on to you. So you don't need to be so lost in the particulars. You just have to follow the way of God, and then things will work out.
Yeah. But of course, you also have to use your intelligence and your practical capabilities. Yeah. But it's true that you can kind of. So what he wants to inspire us to is to find a kind of peace with the situation through this connection with the divine.
Exactly. And I just we can just go through usually the various stages of what prayer looks like, from the most quote unquote primitive to the most enlightened. Yeah. It says, like you mentioned, that it's not an Aladdin's lamp. You cannot just make a wish list and say, I want $1 million, I want a big house, I want blah blah blah. Like that's not how it works. I mean, you can ask for it, but most likely that won't happen.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Not if it's not in store for you anyway.
Yeah. It's also like that there's some logical limitations to it. Usually one of the classic examples that if you have the soccer World Cup, right, and every player on every team prays that their team will win and their country will win. But that's a logical impossibility. Even for God, he or she cannot fulfill that prayer for every player on every team, because there's only one set of gold medals, right?
No.
So even though they pray and pray and pray and pray and pray, it won't happen for everybody. So it has to be like logically possible to fulfill the prayer.
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah.
And this is like there's different levels to it, different stages to it. So in the beginning you have the animal, and the animal scream.
Yeah,
that's like a precursor for prayer, because it doesn't call out to its fellow animal beings, because they're all gone at this point.
So he's talking about an animal being attacked by a predator.
Yeah,
and there's this cry of anxiety happening. Yeah, and that's the kind of primordial root of prayer.
Exactly, where it's like you are seeking the heavens and so on to speak. You want to get out. Yeah. And then it's like
maybe we should mention here that also very often if people come in dangerous situations. So I had this friend of mine who told he was driving on the highway in France, and they came into some turbulence. They were driving with a what do you call it, a camping wagon, and they came into some turbulence and came into an accident. Yeah. And his wife were crying out, "Oh God!" She was crying. And later on, jokingly, he said that he was sure they only survived because she managed to cry, "Oh God!" Yeah. But it kind of shows that, and I don't think she was religious. Yeah. But very often, when people come in very dire situations, you will have this cry of anxiety, like the animal. And now, of course, we don't have to cry like that, but we could say, "Oh God."
Exactly, yeah. And there's an old saying about this: no atheists in foxholes, no atheists in trenches. Yeah. Also, if you're in an airplane that's about to fall down, then people start to pray.
It's very common,
yeah, instinctively.
So we should mention that according to Martinus, there is this religious instinct, that is in a sense indestructible. Yeah, it's because it belongs to the very core of our own being.
Yeah, Exactly. And then, so that's step one, the animal scream. Step two is like, ask for power to take your destiny, as we alluded to before, that you have some karma coming at you, and instead of saying, I want to get rid of the karma, I want to get rid of the pain, you say, please enliven me with spirit and the ability to take my destiny.
Yeah, so also Martinus would write about this story in the Bible called the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus has these premonitions about what is going to happen, and I think it says that he's sweating blood or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he asked, if it's possible, let this bitter chalice pass me by, but not my will, but thy will be done.
Exactly.
And this is a bit what you're talking about here, that he's asking for courage to take upon him what is the will of God.
Exactly, and that's step 3 in terms of how advanced the prayer can get, that you wish for the best solution, even if it's not the best for me. As you mentioned, Jesus in seminar, and then also it could be if you're in a kind of a triangular drama, 3 relationship with your wife and somebody else, and your wife wants to leave you for somebody else. That's a classic example. You can say, well, I would like my wife to stay, but if it's the best solution for everybody, maybe she should get together with the lover instead. Yeah,
and also Martinus will talk about prayer as simply aligning with the facts.
Yeah.
So, for example, maybe you've lost your child, which is the example that he mentions.
Yeah.
But when you say not mine, but thy will be done, you kind of align with the facts that you cannot change anyway.
Yeah.
And he says that when you truthfully say that and accept the facts as they are, I think he says something like a great angel is kind of entering into your aura.
Yeah.
So it's very magical to come to terms with the things that you cannot change.
Yeah. And it's also the basics of like most psychotherapy, right? Like accept the world as it is and take responsibility. And you can be a complete atheist and still have that approach to it.
Yes, and so also we could talk, that's one dimension of prayer, that it has this therapeutic effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's like the 4th and final stage that he mentioned, that prayer will evolve into a continuous conversation with God.
Yeah.
That you're constantly feeling like you have a conversational body that you talk to, and
it doesn't even need to be words. I mean, it can just be putting your mind to God, concentrating on God in a situation you're in.
Yeah, exactly. And then you feel, you start to have like a shift in mindset. It's like instead of like random forces acting upon you, it's like everything I meet, everybody I interact with, good or bad and so on, is a continuous conversation you have with other beings and directly with God.
Yeah, so it's you could say that's one aspect of prayer also, that it's actually stimulating our intuition, our ability to experience that which is beyond time and space, and in particular to experience the divine and the Godhead as a fact, as a reality.
Yeah, I find that to be like personally a very interesting object of meditation, and also / prayer, right? They just focus on the stillness behind the phenomena. Just attune your mind to the stillness. And I think it has a very enlivening and energetic feel to it, to kind of focus your mind on the timeless dimension beyond the timely.
Yeah, and also maybe we should talk a little about meditation here, because in this book called Meditation by Martinus, he also goes into, he sees prayer as a kind of meditation, but it's a meditation with God on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
And he believes that's kind of a safety mechanism.
Yeah.
Because meditation in general can be quite dangerous if you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
So he's talking about things like it can actually provoke cosmic glimpses that you've not matured to experience naturally, and that would cause things like mental disturbances and nervous breakdown and so on.
Exactly. So he's very clear that when he talks about good meditation, it's usually concentrating on God and what you could call like easygoing mindfulness.
And also unselfishness in general. So praying for somebody else to be helped in a situation, or in general, as you said, praying for what must be the best for all implied beings and so on.
Yeah, but he was very clear that most Westerners, they shouldn't engage in very advanced meditation techniques, especially not unguided, because you can fry your nervous system.
And he was more. I mean, he simply said that these practices are developed for another time and another culture.
Yeah,
and they're not meant to be used now, and it can lead to a lot of unwanted results if we do so.
Yeah, it's really like there's one example about somebody who was doing like loving kindness meditation many hours a day, and you just focus on love and love and love and love. That can be too much, actually. Of course, you should be having a loving approach to other people and concentrate on that. But if you are too overly focused on it in a meditation practice, it can overwhelm your system.
Yeah, and then so from Martinus's point of view, the emphasis in our spiritual practice should be our daily life and our relationship to our fellow beings.
Yeah.
And then meditation, prayer is kind of an aid in that process, dealing with the everyday practicalities of life.
It's like a guidance in terms of how to deal with your life. And also one of the aspects I find most appealing and most relaxing about Martinus cosmology is that you don't have to do a certain thing, right? So you don't have to do very advanced yoga poses or very advanced meditations or very advanced prayers or anything. He says you'll find just as you are, you'll get there.
Yeah, and basically it's about, I mean, I think it's said perhaps in the Bible as well, but it's like giving the thirsty something to drink, giving the hungry something to eat.
Yeah.
These should be your main spiritual practices if you want to evolve. And then, of course, you also mentioned earlier this thing about loving your enemies.
Yeah.
And so whenever you meet resistance in life, somebody who doesn't like you or somebody who opposes you in some ways, there's your field of work.
Yeah.
Also, he would talk about close, intimate relationships as molding us because there are some very strong kind of primordial forces at play in these close, very intimate relationships. For example, matrimony.
Yeah.
So he would say that would be like a grinding stone.
Yeah.
And this is what you should focus on, all the difficulties that you encounter in everyday life and how to come into a loving relationship, both to the difficulties and those who kind of embody the difficulties.
It's way better to just be engaged in life in terms of spiritual development rather than to become a hermit and sit somewhere in Tibet and just meditate in a cave somewhere.
But we should also say that there are some people, very few, the people. So we mentioned these categories of sexuality earlier. Yeah. So there's a group of people that he gave the letter I, I people. Yeah. The letter I.
Yeah. The category of I. Yeah.
Yeah, the category of I. And they've kind of outlived this, are satiated by being, for example, in these long-lasting intimate relationships like matrimony and so on.
Yeah.
And also they have no ambition in life. They're in a, you could say, a place that is where contemplation upon, say, God and so on is the natural things for them to do. So he said in the East, they will naturally live like hermits, for example. And in the West, they might not live in the mountains. They can live in bigger cities and so on. Yeah. But they will live very kind of secluded life in jobs of minor importance and so on, and kind of stay for themselves very often. Yeah. But also be very loving and generous towards all beings they come into contact with. Yeah. So there can be a state in evolution where becoming a hermit is the natural thing, but it's not becoming a hermit that will bring you into cosmic consciousness or to a higher level of evolution. It's more the other way around. Once you've arrived at this higher state of evolution and coming close to having this experience of cosmic consciousness, becoming a hermit might be the natural thing to do.
Might be the natural next step. Yeah, well, there's this old saying about, if you think you are enlightened, go and spend a week with your family.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then see how it happens. And if you have issues, perhaps you still have something to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that's important is that we can, of course, easily fool ourselves. Yeah. And this is also where, for example, in the Lord's Prayer, there are these lines like, lead us not into temptation, which is basically a prayer about not fooling ourselves and suggesting ourselves into thinking that we're something that we're not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you mentioned that not my will, but yours be done. And also, there's sometimes some objection that some people have about, well, I don't want to bother God with my issues, right? That I should just take care of them myself rather than pray for a solution. And I don't want to take up bandwidth from the divine. And then Martinus' counterexample for that is usually, well, if you have some parents and some kids, it should be very natural for the kids to ask for help and ask advice from the parents. Otherwise, you have this weird relationship where the kids just stay mute and hide themselves in their room. And that's not how the relationship is supposed to work.
Yeah, and there are some mechanics about, you could say communicational mechanics about prayer and how it works that we might briefly touch upon. Yeah. Because in Martinus' view, there's a group of people that are in physical incarnation on this planet, but the planet also has a consciousness. And in this the consciousness kind of serve as a spiritual realm for all the beings living on this planet. Yeah. And in the spiritual realm, you have very advanced beings who have Christ consciousness. Yeah. So Martinus uses this traditional term providence. Yeah. And providence is not something abstract. It's actually a group of beings, and you could say angelic beings in a sense, because they don't need to be in incarnation. They can manifest physically, according to Martinus, if they want to. But most often they're just kind of doing the work, and so they're, you could say in a sense, they're employed by the planet to oversee what is happening on the planet on our level.
Sure.
And there's a whole, you could say, hierarchy, and it's not a status hierarchy. It's kind of a functional hierarchy where the more capacity you have, the higher the more insight, the more knowledge you have, the higher you are in the hierarchy. And so there's a group of beings there whose main desire is to help us in any way possible. Yeah. And so when we go into prayer, although Martinus, so there are some traditions where you have concepts like masters of the hierarchy and so on, and you give them names. Martinus didn't advise that we focus on particular beings in the spiritual realm. We should focus on God. Yeah. But what happens is that those who actually hear the prayer are these particular beings, very advanced morally and scientifically beings, who have all sorts of means to help us if help is possible.
Exactly. So that's a very key point. You shouldn't concern yourself with trying to find a specific guardian angel or specific spirit that you direct your prayers to. Just pray to God, and then it'll be worked out.
Yeah, and sometimes, for example, a lot of people may have experience suddenly be inspired to help somebody. And this inspiration might come from beings in the spiritual realm who've actually listened to the prayer of someone. So I remember, for example, one time I was a post and I had a puncture and it was a car, it's a big car, and I didn't know how to, I've never experienced it before.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, so of course I put my mind to what am I going to do here? That was kind of my prayer. And before I knew of it, this guy came about, and he just, without asking or anything, he just jumped out of the car and started to change my wheel. And before I could say thank you, he was gone again. And I think sometimes you can experience things like that because we're not only communicating on this physical plane, but Martinus would also say all our thoughts, in a sense, are prayers.
Yeah.
And all our thoughts can be read by people in the spiritual realm. Yeah. And they can take action not directly in the physical realm, but more indirectly by inspiring. So somebody else perhaps have this desire to help others. Well, this person then becomes kind of a vehicle for these beings to give inspiration to do certain things that are needed on the physical plane. Yeah. So there's a kind of logistic to this communication happening between us and the Godhead.
Exactly. That's also what he says. Like you can, if you need help, you can do different things. You can ask fellow beings. Or you can direct your prayer upwards to the God, and hopefully He will redirect the traffic so that you will get the help you need. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's helpful for you, because that's so the basic thing is that we live in a loving universe, and our prayers are heard if they are helpful for us. But it's not always that which we think are helpful that is actually helpful. Yeah. So some of the time we need these challenges to grow. Yeah. And if that's what we need, why would a loving? It's like if you're a parent again to your child, you don't always say yes to your child. Sometimes you say no, or you say to your child, figure it out for yourself, because you want your child to grow and become more mature. And this is
what has been mentioned in a previous episode. Like if you just whisper a prayer, but then violently do the opposite, it doesn't really help that much. Like if you've been smoking for 50 years and then you get lung cancer, you cannot just pray it away because your actions have been diametrically opposed to good health for so long.
Yeah. So the prayer will seem like a whisper, even if you shout it. It will seem like a whisper relative to the amount of activity you've put into bringing yourself to the place where you are now.
Exactly. Yeah, interesting. And we talked about using it in the East and so on, and don't use it for like as a method of artificial enlightenment or cosmic consciousness and so on. That will come in its own way.
That happens automatically if you do the right things. If you're engaged in life and try to do good for others and yourself. Cosmic consciousness is, in Martinus' view, it's a natural thing. Yeah. It's like growing your teeth at a certain point.
They will pop out, It's just the strongest indicator of how close you are to cosmic consciousness is how humble you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it mentioned also some place.
And maybe you should say about what Martinus means about being humble is simply having a realistic image of where you actually are in evolution. Yeah. Not trying to be something that you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, but he mentions that if you think you're going to be enlightened tomorrow, most likely you won't. Like it is the people who are really humble who will soon get cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, and who are engaged in the world and engaged in helping others and do good.
Yeah, exactly. So don't see it as a way of enlightenment, and he also,
I mean, maybe you should say people can do whatever they want.
Whatever they want. Yeah.
But what Martinus, I mean, he wanted to inspire us to do those things that are actually helpful.
Yeah. Actually, there's also this one anecdote that he once saw on television some people taking psychedelics. And then he spontaneously just said that, well, no, don't do that. It's like forced entry into the divine. So he's very clear
into the sanctity.
Yeah, into the sanctity, because it's like you supercharge your spiritual organs.
Yeah, this thing I talked about earlier, that you can kind of provoke these cosmic glimpses. So the reason why it can be dangerous is because it's effective. But if you're not sufficiently mature to carry this kind of insight you acquire, it might lead to these kind of mental disturbances or nervous breakdown. And of course, you see that. I mean, you see sometimes. I mean, you see people who think they are the Christ, for example, reborn, and who think they're set on this planet to redeem all of humanity and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes wonder, like, if you actually are Christ coming back, like, how would you know? Because there's so many people claiming to be Christ, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in a sense, Martinus would say about himself that he had Christ consciousness, and he said, you could ask, why did he say that? But it's what he says in some places is that just like if you read a scientific work, you tell your sources. What are the sources for my knowledge?
Yeah,
and so he had to be truthful about the fact that his source of knowledge was this cosmic conscious state.
Yeah.
But what he said was that we shouldn't believe it just because he said it.
Yeah.
But the proof of the fact was in his work.
Yeah.
So to the extent that his work over time shows to be what he postulates that it is, this actual science about the spiritual realm, a spiritual science that will initiate us into the laws of life. If that turns out to be true, well, then it also will be the truth of the matter.
Yeah. That's what you said.
And this is what we have to see. I mean, this is something to be explored. We shouldn't believe it, but we should. What he wants to inspire us to do is to explore his work and his concept of God and the structure of the living being and so on.
Yeah.
And find out for ourselves whether it's true or not.
Yeah. Go out and live it and see if it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good place to start.
All right. Let's start it here.